Before you finish reading this sentence, your face will have already fired signals through 43 separate muscles, more than almost any other species alive, broadcasting emotions you haven't even decided to share yet. That's not a metaphor, that's biology running on autopilot. And it's been running that way for millions of years longer than words have existed. So here's the question nobody really sits with. What were we actually doing before speech? What did it look like when the most advanced tool you had was your own face and a well-timed grunt? How did someone say, "There's a predator behind you"? Without saying anything at all, the answer is stranger and richer than most people assume. And once you see it, you'll never watch two people talk the same way again. Start with what you already do without thinking right now. Without moving your mouth, you could tell someone you're annoyed, suspicious, delighted, or completely unimpressed. Your eyebrows would do it, your posture would do it, that slight tightening around your eyes would do it. This is ancient hardware. Not a coincidence. Evolution built a communication device out of meat and bone long before language showed up, and it built it well. Researchers studying facial expressions across radically different cultures, rural Papua New Guinea, downtown Tokyo, remote villages that had almost no contact with the outside world, found the same core expressions everywhere. Fear looks like fear, disgust looks like disgust. These aren't learned habits passed down like table manners, they're biological broadcasts, hardwired and universal. Psychologist Paul Ekman spent decades mapping this terrain and identified what he called microexpressions, involuntary flickers of emotion lasting less than a fifth of a second. Impossible to fully suppress, they leak through even when someone is actively trying to hide what they feel. That's not a glitch in the system, that's the system working exactly as designed. Because an individual who could silently flash danger across a camp without alerting the predator itself had a massive survival edge. So did the one who could read that flash and react before conscious thought even caught up. We didn't invent communication. When we invented language, we upgraded something that already worked. Now rewind, not centuries, millions of years, around 6 million years ago, the branch that would become us split from the branch that would become chimpanzees. And if you watch chimps today, you'll notice something uncomfortably familiar. They gesture with clear, deliberate intent, an open palm, to beg a touch on the shoulder, to request grooming, a specific beckoning motion, to invite another individual to follow. And critically, they only do this when they can see the other chimp's face. They wait for eye contact, they repeat the gesture. If ignored, they stop the moment they get a response. That's not instinct on autopilot, that's intentional communication aimed at a mind they assume is paying attention. Researchers at the University of St. Andrews cataloged more than 80 distinct gestures in wild chimpanzee populations and found that many carried consistent meaning even across groups that had never encountered each other, which tells you these signals are old, possibly older than the species itself. Here's where it gets personal. Human infants gesture before they speak. Around 9 months old, long before real language shows up, babies start pointing. They hold objects up to show you. They reach for what they want. They wave. And this sequence mirrors almost exactly what we see in other great apes, except for one detail that separates us from nearly every other animal on Earth. Pointing, for us, isn't just a request. You can spend a lifetime with a dog, and it will stare at your finger, never at what you're pointing to. Human infants point to share attention, to pull another mind toward the same thing they're looking at. That single distinction may be one of the seeds of everything that came after. It's part of why the gestural origin theory of language argues something genuinely unsettling to anyone who assumes speech came first. Language may not have started in the mouth at all, it may have started in the hands, with the voice arriving later as an add-on. There's even a neurological clue buried in your own skull. Broca's area, the region most tied to language production, sits in the exact same neighborhood as the circuitry controlling fine hand and mouth movement. It might not be a language center that happens to live near motor control. It might be a motor planning system that got recruited for language. The hands built the road, the mouth just learned to drive on it. But gesture has one obvious flaw. It only works when you can see each other, and early humans spent enormous stretches of time where visibility wasn't guaranteed. Dense forest, darkness, scattered terrain, so something else had to fill the gap. Not words, just sound. Before language, there were calls, vocalizations carrying meaning through pitch, rhythm, and intensity rather than grammar. And these systems could be startlingly specific. Vervet monkeys have distinct alarm calls for different predators. One for eagles that sends the troop diving into bushes, a different one for snakes that makes them freeze and scan the ground. Another for leopards that sends them straight up into the trees, same species, same troop, three sounds. Three completely different survival responses. That's not raw emotional noise. That's a signal referring to something specific happening out in the world. Our ancestors almost certainly had something like this. Probably richer, given the sheer weight of social complexity stacked on top of that lineage over millions of years. So, if gesture came first and calls filled the gaps gesture couldn't reach, what does that mean for everything else layered on top? Stick with me, because this is where the story gets genuinely strange. Neanderthals had a hyoid bone, the small structure in the throat tied to vocal capability. That's nearly identical to ours. That means they very likely had the physical hardware for complex vocalization, and here's the detail most people skim past too quickly. Neanderthals buried their dead. They made pigments. There's evidence they wore eagle talons as personal ornaments. Those aren't the behaviors of creatures with nothing to say to each other. Those are the behaviors of a species navigating a rich social world that almost certainly demanded some form of symbolic communication just to hold itself together. Then there's rhythm, the one nobody gives enough credit to. Every known human culture drums, claps, sings, or moves together in some rhythmic form. When people synchronize movement, walking in step, drumming together, chanting together, something measurable happens in the body. Oxytocin rises, pain thresholds shift, group cohesion improves in ways researchers can actually track. Anthropologist Robin Dunbar, known for his work on the social brain, has argued that early rhythmic vocalization may have functioned as a kind of grooming at a distance in smaller primate groups. Physical grooming was the glue holding relationships together, but grooming is one-on-one, and as human groups swelled toward 150 people or more, you simply couldn't groom your way to that level of cohesion. You needed something that could bond many people simultaneously. Singing did that, drumming did that. Sound became social glue on a scale touch never could. Quick pause. If you've made it this far, you already know more about prelinguistic communication than most people ever think about in their entire lives. Drop a comment with the one detail from this that surprised you most. I read every single one, and it genuinely shapes what I dig into next, because there's more, and it gets stranger. Humans can smell fear, not metaphorically. Literally, studies have shown that compounds released in the sweat of genuinely frightened people trigger measurable physiological changes in the people who smell them, even when those people consciously believe they're smelling something neutral. The signal bypasses conscious thought entirely and goes straight to the threat response system. We can smell stress. We can, under certain conditions, smell disease. The famous sweaty t-shirt. Studies found that people consistently rate the scent of individuals with sufficiently different immune profiles as more attractive. Evolution quietly running genetic compatibility calculations the conscious mind never gets to weigh in on. Early humans, packed into close quarters, sleeping in shared spaces, would have been steeped in this constant chemical channel of information their whole lives, and underneath all of it sits cognition itself. The earliest stone tools, dating back roughly 2.6 million years, are simple: a deliberate strike, a sharp edge. But the Acheulean hand axe, appearing around 1.76 million years ago, requires something far more advanced: holding a target shape in mind, planning several steps ahead, executing a precise sequence toward a goal that isn't even visible yet. That's hierarchical, sequential thinking. The same cognitive architecture underlying grammar, where each word shapes and is shaped by the ones around it. The scaffolding for language was quietly assembling for over 1 million years before language itself ever arrived, which brings us to the real twist. When Homo sapiens finally showed up roughly 300,000 years ago, the brain didn't need a dramatic leap to start speaking. The infrastructure, gestural, vocal, rhythmic, cognitive, was already mostly in place. Grammar may have been the last piece clicking into a system that was already rich, layered, and functioning. Not silence turning into Shakespeare overnight, a sophisticated multi-channel system simply gaining one more channel, and that system never went away. It's still running underneath every conversation you have. It's why you trust someone's crossed arms over their flat "I'm fine." It's why you feel a room shift before anyone speaks. It's why a lie gets caught not by the words themselves, but by the half-second mismatch between what the mouth says and what the face, the posture, and the timing are saying. Instead, every shrug, every glance, every deliberate silence isn't a failure to communicate. It's the oldest part of you, still fluent, still working. Exactly the way it's worked for millions of years if this kind of deep dive into where human behavior actually comes from is your thing. Subscribing means you won't miss the next one. And there's a lot more buried in this story than we had time to cover today.